When the prostrate Protestant, when the prostrate Protestant, when the prostrate Protestant goes marching in. The Baroque, Enlightenment and Revolutions Era. The Council of Trent generated a revival of religious life and Marian devotions in the Catholic Church. During the Reformation, the Church had defended its Marian beliefs against Protestant views. At the same time, the Catholic world was engaged in ongoing Ottoman wars in Europe against Asia Minor, which were fought and won under the auspices of the Virgin Mary. The victory at the Battle of Lepanto 1571 was accredited to her and signified the beginning of a strong resurgence of Marian devotions, focusing specifically on Mary, the Queen of Heaven and Earth, and her powerful role as mediatrix of many graces. The Colloquium Marianum, an elite group, and the Sodality of Our Lady based their activities on a virtuous life free of cardinal sins. Pope Paul V and Gregory VI ruled in 1617-1622 to be inadmissible to state that the Virgin was conceived non-immaculate, supporting the belief that the Virgin Mary, in the first instance of her conception, was preserved free from all stain of original sin. Alexander VII declared in 1661 that the soul of Mary was free from original sin. Pope Clement X ordered the Feast of the Immaculata for the whole Church in 1708. The Feast of the Rosary was introduced in 1716. The Feast of the Seven Sorrows in 1727. The Angelus prayer was strongly supported by Pope Benedict VIII in 1724 and by Pope Benedict XII in 1742. Popular Marian piety was even more colourful and varied than ever before. Numerous Marian pilgrimages, Marian Salve devotions, new Marian litanies, Marian theatre plays, Marian hymns, Marian processions. Marian fraternities today, mostly defunct, had millions of members. The Enlightenment constituted a new challenge of the Church. Unlike the Protestant Reformation, which questioned certain Christian doctrines, the Enlightenment questioned Christianity as a whole. Generally, it elevated human reason above divine revelation and downgraded religious authority such as the papacy based on it. Parallel, the Church attempted to fend off Gallicanism and Councillarism, ideologies which threatened the papacy and structured the Church. Toward the latter part of the 17th century, Pope Innocent IX viewed the increasing Asia Minor attacks against Europe, which were supported by France, as the major threat for the Church above all else. He built a Polish-Austrian coalition for the Asia Minor defeat at Vienna in 1683. Scholars have called him a saintly pope because he reformed abuses by the Church, including simony, nepotism, and the lavish papal expenditures that had caused him to inherit a papal debt of 50 million scudi. By eliminating certain honorary posts and introducing new fiscal policies, Innocent IX was able to regain control of the Church finances. Innocent X and Clement XII battled Jansenism and Gallicanism, which supported conciliarism and rejected papal primacy, demanding special concessions for the Church in France. This weakened the Church's ability to respond to Gallicanist thinkers such as Denis Diderot, who challenged fundamental doctrines of the Church. In 1685, Gallicanist King Louis XII of France issued the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, ending a century of religious toleration. France forced Catholic theologians to support conciliarism and deny papal infallibility. The king threatened Pope Innocent IX with a general council and a military takeover of the papal state. The absolute French state used Gallicanism to gain control of virtually all major church appointments as well as many of the church's properties. State authority over the church became popular in other countries as well. In Belgium and Germany, Gallicanism appeared in the form of Febronianism, which rejected papal prerogatives in an equal fashion. Emperor Joseph II of Austria practiced Josephinism by regulating church life appointments and massive confiscation of church properties. The 18th century is also the time of the Catholic Enlightenment, a multifaceted reform movement. In what is now the Western United States, the Catholic Church expanded its missionary activity, but until the 19th century had to work in conjunction with the Spanish crown and military. Junipero Serra, the Franciscan priest in charge of this effort, founded a series of missions and presidios in California, which became important economic, political, and religious institutions. These missions brought grain, cattle, and a new political and religious order to the Indian tribes of California. Coastal and overland routes were established from Mexico City and mission outposts in Texas and New Mexico that resulted 13 major California missions by 1781. European visitors, though, brought new diseases that killed off a third of the native population. Mexico shut down the missions in the 1820s and sold off the lands. Only in the 19th century, after the breakdown of most Spanish and Portuguese colonies, was the Vatican able to take charge of Catholic missionary activities through its propaganda-fired organisation. During this period, the church faced colonial abuses during the Portuguese and Spanish governments. In South America, the Jesuits protected native peoples from enslavement by establishing semi-independent settlements called reductions. Pope Gregory XIII, challenging Spanish and Portuguese sovereignty, appointed his own candidates as bishops in the colonies, condemned slavery and the slave trade in 1839, and approved the ordination of native clergy in spite of government racism. Now, Christianity in India had the tradition of St. Thomas establishing the faith in Kerala, which we were talking about earlier. They are called St. Thomas Christians. The community was very small until the Jesuit Francis Xavier began missionary work there. Roberto di Nobili, a Tuscan Jesuit missionary to southern India, followed in his path. He pioneered inculturation, adopting many Brahmin customs which were not, in his opinion, contrary to Christianity. He lived like a Brahmin, learned Sanskrit, and presented Christianity as part of Indian beliefs, not identical with the Portuguese culture of the colonialists. He permitted the use of all customs which in his view did not directly contradict Christian teachings. By 1640 there were 40,000 Christians in Madurai alone. In 1632 Pope Gregory X gave permission for this approach, but strong anti-Jesuit sentiments in Portugal, France, and even in Rome resulted in a reversal. This ended the successful Catholic missions in India. In 1744, Benedict XII forbade the so-called Malabarites in India, with the result that leading Indian castes who wanted to adhere to the traditional cultures turned away from the Catholic Church. The anti-clericalism of the French Revolution saw the wholesale nationalisation of church property in attempts to establish a state-run church. Large numbers of priests refused to take an oath of compliance at the National Assembly, leading to the church being outlawed and replaced by a new religion of the worship of reason, in line with the Enlightenment era, but it never gained popularity. In this period, all monasteries were destroyed, 30,000 priests were exiled, and hundreds more were killed. When Pope Pius VI sided against the revolution, the First Coalition, Napoleon invaded Italy. The 82-year-old Pope was taken as a prisoner to France in February 1798 and soon passed away. To win popular support for his rule, Napoleon re-established the Catholic Church in France through the Concordat of 1801. The church lands were never returned, however. The priests and other religious were given salaries by the government, which maintained church properties through tax revenues. Catholics were allowed to continue some of their schools. The end of the Napoleonic Wars, signalled by the Congress of Vienna, brought Catholic revival and the return of the Papal States to the Pope. The Jesuits were restored. After this, France remained basically Catholic. The census of 1872 counted 36 million people, of whom 35.4 million were listed as Catholics, 600,000 as Protestants, 50,000 as Jews, and 80,000 as free thinkers. The revolution failed to destroy the Catholic Church, and Napoleon's Concordat of 1801 restored its status. The return of the Bourbons in 1814 brought back many rich nobles and landowners who supported the Church, seeing it as a bastion of conservatism and monarchism. However, the monasteries, with their vast land holdings and political power, were gone. Much of the land had been sold to urban entrepreneurs who lacked historic connections to the land and the peasants. Few new priests were trained in the 1790-1814 period, and many left the church. The result was that the number of parish clergy plunged from 60,000 in 1790 to 25,000 in 1815, many of them elderly. Entire regions, especially around Paris, were left with few priests. On the other hand, some traditional regions held fast to the faith, led by local nobles and historic families. The comeback was slow, extremely slow in the larger cities and industrial areas. With systematic missionary work and a new emphasis on the liturgy and devotions to the Virgin Mary, plus support from Napoleon III, there was a comeback. In 1870 there were 56,500 priests, representing a much younger and more dynamic force in the villages and towns, with a thick network of schools, charities and lay organisations. Conservative Catholics held control of the national government 1820 to 1830, but most often played secondary political roles or had to fight the assault from Republicans, Liberals, Socialists and Seculars. During the lifetime of the Third Republic, there were battles over the status of the Catholic Church. The French clergy and bishops were closely associated with the monarchists, and many of its hierarchy were from noble families. Republicans were based in the anti-clerical middle class, who saw the Church's alliance with the monarchists as a political threat to republicanism and a threat to the modern spirit of progress. The Republicans detested the Church for its political and class affiliations. For them, the Church represented outmoded traditions, superstition and monarchism. The Republicans were strengthened by Protestant and Jewish support. Numerous laws were passed to weaken the Catholic Church. In 1879, priests were excluded from the administrative committees of hospitals and the boards of charity. In 1880, new measures were directed against the religious congregations. From 1880 to 1890 came the substitution of laywomen for nuns in many hospitals. Napoleon's 1801 Concordat continued in operation, but in 1881 the government finally cut it off salaries to priests it disliked. The 1882 school laws of Republican Jules Ferry set up a national system of public schools that taught strict puritanical morality but no religion. For a while, privately funded Catholic schools were tolerated. Civil marriage became compulsory, divorce was introduced, and chaplains were removed from the army. When Leo VIII became Pope in 1878, he tried to calm church-state relations. In 1884, he told French bishops not to act in a hostile manner to the state. In 1892, he issued an encyclical advising French Catholics to rally to the Republic and defend the Church by participating in Republican politics. This attempt to improve in the relationship failed. Deep-rooted suspicions remained on both sides and were inflamed by the Dreyfus affair, understandably. Catholics were, for the most part, anti-Dreyfusard. The Assumptionists published anti-Semitic and anti-Republican articles in the journal Le Croix. This infuriated Republican politicians who were eager to take revenge. Often they worked in alliance with Masonic lodges. The Waldeck Rousseau Ministry, 1899 throughout to 1902, and the Combes Ministry from 1902 to 1905, fought with the Vatican over the appointment of bishops. Chaplains were removed from naval and military hospitals, and soldiers were ordered not to frequent Catholic clubs. Combes, as Prime Minister in 1902, was determined to thoroughly defeat Catholicism. He closed down all parochial schools in France. Then he had Parliament reject authorisation of all religious orders. This meant that all 54 orders were dissolved, and about 20,000 members immediately left France, many for Spain. In 1905, the 1801 Concordat was abrogated. Church and state were finally separated. All church property was confiscated. Public worship was given over to associations of Catholic laymen who controlled access to churches. In practice, masses and rituals continued. The church was badly hurt and lost half its priests. In the long run, however, it gained autonomy, for the state no longer had a voice in choosing bishops, and Gallicanism was dead. In Africa, at the end of the 19th century, Catholic missionaries followed colonial governments into Africa and built schools, hospitals, monasteries and churches as they had done in India and elsewhere around the globe. They enthusiastically supported the colonial administration of the French Congo, which forced the native populations of large full-scale labour and forced through summary execution and mutilation. Catholic missionaries in the French Congo tried to prevent the French central government from stopping these atrocities. The